Welcome to my presentation of the 10 plagues of Egypt and the gods that are associated with each plague. I hope and pray that you enjoy this. This is a little different than what I'm normally used to doing, so I am just giving it to God and trusting Him that He will help me with this. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. God bless. Exodus 7:14 through 23. And the Lord said unto Moses, Pharaoh's heart is hardened. He refuseth to let the people go. Get thee unto Pharaoh in the morning. Lo, he goeth out into the water, and thou shalt stand by the river's bank against he come. And the rod which was turned to a serpent shall take in thine hand. And thou shalt say unto him, The Lord God of the Hebrews hath sent me unto thee, saying, Let my people go, that they may serve me in the wilderness. And behold, hitherto thou wouldest not hear. Thus saith the Lord, and this thou shalt know that I am the Lord. Behold, I will smite the rod that is in mine hand upon the waters which are in the river, and they shall be turned to blood. And the fish that is in the river shall die, and the river shall stink, and the Egyptians shall loath to drink of the water of the river. And the Lord spoke unto Moses, saying unto Aaron, Take thy rod and stretch thine hand out upon the waters of Egypt, upon their streams, upon their rivers, and upon their ponds, and upon all their pools of water, that they may become blood, that there may be blood throughout all the land of Egypt, both in vessels of wood and in vessels of stone. And Moses and Aaron did so, as the Lord commanded. And he lifted up the rod, and he smote the waters that were in the river, in the sight of Pharaoh, and in the sight of his servants, and all the waters that were in the river were turned to blood. And the fish that were in the river died, and the river stank, and the Egyptians could not drink of the water of the river, and there was blood throughout all the land of Egypt. And the magicians of Egypt did so with their enchantments. And Pharaoh's heart was hardened, neither did he hearken unto them as the Lord had said. And Pharaoh turned and went into his house, neither did he set his heart this also. And all the Egyptians digged around about the river for water to drink, for they could not drink of the water of the river. And 7 days were fulfilled, that after the Lord had smitten the river. So now we have the gods that are tied to the Nile, and there are several, and there's probably more than this, but this is what I found through my research. So Khnum was the god of the Nile and was considered to be the creator of people, and he created them through mud from the Nile that was taken from the Nile. Hapi was the fertility god of the Nile who made the land fertile for crops. He pushed up the minerals from the river, and the people gathered all these rich soil that was pushed up from the Nile, and they used it to make their fields for their crops very fertile. There was a reason why this area was called the Fertile Crescent. And something about Hapi also was that he was considered to be androgynous. Even though they labeled him as a he had characteristics of both male and female. And then we have Osiris, which is, of course, everyone's heard of Osiris. He's one of the greatest gods to the Egyptians, and it was believed that the Nile was his bloodstream, and that it was his lice blood, and that without the Nile, Osiris would die. So through all this, God was mocking the supposed creator of men by defiling the Nile and all of its tribunes that connect it to the Nile. When God turned the water into blood, he was mocking their God who was supposed to make the land fertile, because when he did this, he made the land infertile. And the waters were useless because they were literally blood, and everything in the Nile died. God also ceremoniously killed Osiris when he defiled the Nile, which would have polluted his quote-unquote bloodstream. Not only was the water turned into blood, but as I stated just a moment ago, all the fish in it died, and the whole land of Egypt stank. And I don't know, I know everyone has drove by and smelt a dead, decaying animal carcass on the side of the road as they're driving, and you get a good whiff of it in the heat, and you're just like trying not to gag. Well, think of that a million times over. There's dead fish literally everywhere, on the banks, floating in the river, and the whole land of Egypt, even in Goshen, stank from the stench of these dead fish. You know, fish were also a main source of food for the Egyptians. So not only was their God silent on the defilement of the mighty Nile, but they were also powerless to stop the dying of all the fish. Why? Because they were false gods. They were carved images. They were more than likely, if anything, they were fallen angels that were demonic in nature, and these people were worshiping them. And they had no real power, especially when compared to Yahweh, our God, the God of the Israelites. The Nile was the heartbeat of Egypt for agriculture and, more importantly, survival. It even affected the vessels for the use of gathering water. There was no way to irrigate their crops or even drink water unless they dug for it. They had to literally dig for their water. And of course, this didn't really affect Pharaoh because he had people underneath him. He had slaves and subordinates, and they were the ones that dug. Pharaoh set up in his palace high and mighty. I'm sure he smelt the stench, but he was so proud in his demeanor because to him, he was a representation of Ra. So he was a god in his own culture. In his own eyes, he was a god. So he was haughty, and his heart was hardened. So in this instance, Pharaoh hardened his own heart because he was above reproach. Exodus 8, 1-7. And the Lord spake unto Moses, Go unto Pharaoh, and say unto him, Thus saith the Lord, Let my people go, that they may serve me. And if thou refuse to let them go, behold, I will smite all thy borders with frogs. And the rivers shall bring forth frogs abundantly, which shall go up and come into thine house, and into thy bedchamber, and upon thy bed, and into the house of thy servants, and upon thy people, and into thy ovens, and into thy kneading troughs. And the frog shall come upon both of thee, upon thy people, and upon all thy servants. And the Lord spake unto Moses, Say unto Aaron, Stretch forth thine hand with thy rod over the streams, over the rivers, and over the ponds, and cause frogs to come up upon the land of Egypt. And Aaron stretched out his hand over the waters of Egypt, and the frogs came up and covered the land of Egypt. And the magicians did so with their enchantments, and brought up frogs upon the land of Egypt. So the goddess tied to frogs was the goddess Hikmet, who was the goddess of fertility and wife to the god Kamum. Frogs represented fruitfulness, blessings, and assurance of blessings. She was depicted as having a frog's head and was said to assist in childbirth. Frogs were so revered that even unintentionally killing one was certain death. What I found amazing was that God used something that was beloved to the Egyptians, something that was cherished, was something that was supposed to represent life, represent abundance, was supposed to represent the fruitfulness of a woman's body and just of life in general. And he took it and he mocked them with it and made it something loathsome. And to top it all off, when Pharaoh asked Moses to pray that God remove the plague of the frogs from him and from his people, he did so by killing them all. I just find that so poetic. Here is something that the Egyptians, it's a death sentence if you kill a frog. And God uses this symbol that is so cherished to them to bring a plague upon them. Because when I first read this without really doing back research, I thought, why would God use frogs? Yeah, they're slimy, but they're cute. What could a frog really do that would be, annoying or bothersome? Yeah, they would probably get in the water jars, and they would probably get in any kind of a container that they could get to, spoiling food, making it inedible. But why would God choose frogs? And then through my research, I found this little gem. And it just shows you God's not only justice, but his poetic justice. This was something that he knew would grab the attention of the Egyptians. And through all of these judgments, he's showing them, your gods are silent. Where are your gods? They're silent. It's just amazing and astounding how God works, and I just get so excited. The more I dug into this, the more excited I got, and I hope that as we go through this, that you get as excited as I was. Exodus 8:15 through 19. But when Pharaoh saw that there was respite, he hardened his heart, and hearkened not unto them, as the Lord had said. And the Lord said unto Moses, Say unto Aaron, Stretch out thy rod, and smite the dust of the land, that it may become a lice throughout all the land of Egypt. And they did so, for Aaron stretched out his hand with his rod, and smote the dust of the earth, and it became lice in man, and in beast. All the dust of the land became lice throughout the land of Egypt. And the magicians did so with their enchantments to bring lice forth, but they could not. So there were lice upon man and upon beast. Then the magicians said unto Pharaoh, This is the finger of God. And Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he hearkened not unto them, as the Lord had said. So through my research, I found that there was not any gods that were tied to this plague. But in some of the versions that I came across, because I cross-referenced just to see if there was any differences because of my research, I seen that some called it gnats, while the King James Version calls it lice. So even though there were not any gods associated with gnats or lice, this was still very important because God used this plague to mock the religious sect of Egypt. The priests of Egypt took pride in that they were physically pure. They shaved their heads, dressed in beautiful robes, and unlike the Egyptian population at large, they usually bathed very frequently. Gnats and lice would disturb their ability to keep their religiously pure lifestyles. In one ancient medical document, the most effective substance in ridding oneself of these pests was to cover yourself in fish spawn, which is fish eggs. So imagine that you're one of these priests and you have not only been defiled with these gnats, which gnats in the English term is actually a broad term for referring winged biting and non-biting insects. So it's a broad term. So it could have been insects such as like mosquitoes and other small insects like that they were biting and non-biting. So they would have just either been a pest or they would have been biting, which would have been even more defilement because of the fact that these priests were now covered in bites, and they were unceremonially unclean. They were unclean now. So they had to cover themselves in these fish eggs, and they were no longer clean, pure, for their religious rites that they had to do in order to honor their gods. So this was really amazing, is what I found out, and I couldn't help but laugh, because God was not only mocking these false Egyptian gods, but he was mocking their priest who worshiped them, who led the people in worship to them. And he was mocking them because he's like, your gods are silent. What are you going to do? How are you going to do it? I don't hear anything. It almost reminds me of when Elijah went against the 450 false prophets of Baal. And he was mocking them, and he was like, where is your God? Is he sleeping? And on one version, as I had stated in my short video before, is he on the toilet? It's just, I love the Bible, and it's the more you dig into it, and the more you learn, the more you research, it's just amazing that how it flows and how you see that these plagues were not merely just plagues. They weren't merely just tools to get the attention of Pharaoh, but it was to show them the impotence of their religion of their gods, that they were gods made of wood and metal and maybe other precious stones, but God, Yahweh, our God, the God of the Israelites, was the one true God, and they could never, ever compare to him. Man, you gotta love the Bible. Exodus 8:20 through 24. And the Lord said unto Moses, Rise up early in the morning, and stand before Pharaoh. Lo, he cometh forth to the water. And say unto him, Thus saith the Lord, Let my people go, that they may serve me. Else if thou wilt not let my people go, behold, I will send swarms of flies upon thee, and upon thy servants, and upon thy people, and into thy houses, and the houses of the Egyptians shall be full of swarms of flies, and also the ground whereupon they are. And I will sever in the day the land of Goshen, in which my people dwell, that no swarms of flies shall be there, to the end thou may know that I am the Lord in the midst of the earth. And I will put a division between my people and thy people. Tomorrow shall be this sign. And the Lord did so. And there came a grievous swarm of flies into the house of Pharaoh, and into his servants' houses, into all the land of Egypt. The land was corrupted by reason of the swarm of flies. So there was one god in particular that I found that was tied to flies. But first, let's talk about the Icamon fly, who was known for boring holes into insects and laying its eggs in them. And when the eggs hatched, the larvae would eat the insects from the inside out, killing it and providing nourishment for the larvae. And then it was just like a vicious cycle over and over again. And while a lot of people in Egypt feared these insects for good reason, the Egyptian farmers, they revered them and they respected them and they coveted them to be on their fields because they helped to keep the pests out of their fields. So this fly was considered to be a manifestation of the god Ukatet. And flies were considered to be a protection against diseases and misfortune, which diseases I do not see, because to me, flies are nasty, and you would think that they would carry diseases because they feed on anything. And they're just nasty. So I don't understand why they were considered to be protection, but that's just what I found in my research. So scratch your head on that one, because it made me scratch my head. But anyways, in every plague so far, we see that Yahweh has used the Egyptians' gods against them, and we also see God is now placing his hand of protection upon the Israelites and protecting them for the rest of the plagues. He is basically, it's like, when I was talking to my group about it, my youth group about it, someone was basically like a barrier that God just created this invisible barrier, kind of like a dog fence that's underground that the dog has a collar on, and if he tries to go past that invisible fence that's underground, it zaps him. So these plagues would not go across this barrier because God said so. It was God's will, so they did not go. God was in complete control. So it's just really amazing how God has used the plagues so far against the Egyptians and against their gods. And it's another thing, it's like, I was wondering, why flies? Why flies? Yeah, they're a pest, they're annoying. I could see them flying into people's eyes and, buzzing around their ears. I've even heard of horror stories of flies laying a random egg in somebody's eye, and then somebody gets this pain in their eye a few weeks later and they have a maggot growing in their eye. Ugh. But the reason why God used these was because there was a God attached to them that was supposed to provide protection against diseases and misfortunes, and that's why he used the flies, because they were not offering protection. They were now a pest. Exodus 9, 1 through 6. Then the Lord said unto Moses, Go in unto Pharaoh, and tell him, Thus saith the Lord God of the Hebrews, Let my people go, that they may serve me. For if thou refuse to let them go, and wilt hold them still, behold, the hand of the Lord is upon thy cattle, which is in the field, upon the horses, upon the asses, upon the camels, upon the oxen, upon the sheep. There shall be a grievous murrain. And the Lord shall serve between the cattle of Israel and the cattle of Egypt. And there shall be nothing die of all that is the children of Israel. And the Lord appointed at that a set time, saying, Tomorrow the Lord shall do this thing in the land. And the Lord did that thing on the morrow, and all the cattle of Egypt died, but the cattle of the children of Israel died none. So Egypt worshipped many gods that are associated with animals. We've all seen them in history books. We've seen them in museums. We've seen them in some shape, form, or fashion. But it seemed like some certain type of animals were more revered than others. And for instance, as far as livestock goes, different types of bulls and cows were especially sacred to them. The Apis bull was considered to be sacred to the god Ptah. This bull was revered and honored, and they fed these bulls delicacies, and they would give these bulls as many heifers as they wanted, and they only had one bull in their temple to Ptah at one time. There was never more than one bull. And they revered these bulls so much that they actually went through the mummifying process with these bulls, and there were 28 mummified bulls found at the temple of Memphis, and they each had their own little tomb that was dedicated in honor of them. Another bull that is sacred is the Menavis bull, which is sacred and associated with the sun god Ra. Hathor, the goddess of love, beauty, and joy, was represented as a heifer, and she's often depicted as suckling the pharaoh and giving him divine nourishment through her udders. Again, the bull-headed god Kamon was also being mocked as well. All the livestock died, not just the cows and bulls, but horses, donkeys, camels, which would have crippled the economy even more since they depended on horses for the battlefield. Egypt actually introduced horses to the battlefield. Donkeys and camels were used for transportation of goods and people, and oxen were used in agriculture. So without the use of oxen to plow their fields and to help them with their daily chores with the fields, planting was impossible because from all of the research I've done, this plague happened around the height of the planting season, which would have completely thrown their planting season off. God was not only mocking the Egyptian gods, but the Egyptians themselves for relying on these false gods who could offer no help. And again, we see that the Israelites are not affected by this plague. This is just a quick slide I wanted to do, and just to kind of show you a few of the Egyptian gods that were depicted as having animal heads in the bodies of people. There was Tav with the head of an ibis, Ra had the head of a falcon, Sekhmet had a head of a lion, and Anubis had the head of a jackal. Now, I probably just butchered probably 2 of those names, but that is okay. But I just wanted you all to kind of get a glance. Like I said, I know everyone, or most everyone, has at least seen some kind of depiction somewhere of these gods. But it makes you wonder, where did they come up with how these gods looked? And they very well could have been fallen angels, or they could have been Nephilim, or they could have just been demonic in nature. But either way, they came from somewhere, just like Greek mythology. All of these Greek gods came from somewhere. They are not gods. They could be fallen angel. They could be demonic in nature. But we all know that Satan masquerades as an angel of light. And he is out to deceive whoever he can. And he has deceived whole nations, whole culture sets. He has deceived so many people throughout the centuries with thinking that with letting them believe that there are other gods besides Yahweh, besides God, our God, the God of the Israelites. It's so sad to see that this is, to some certain degree, is still believed. Now, I don't hear people talking about, at least where I live, I have not heard people talking about the Greek gods or the Egyptian gods, but I have heard people talk about the goddess of the moon. I've heard them talk about, Mother Nature. I don't like calling it Mother Nature because that makes it personified in my book, in my mind, and you're giving it a life of its own, and it's not a mother goddess. It's like they call Earth Gaia. That's a goddess, Gaia. And we have to be careful as Christians of what we're labeling and naming things and calling something. Exodus 9:8-14. And the Lord said unto Moses and unto Aaron, Take you handfuls of ashes of the furnace, and let Moses sprinkle it toward the heaven in the sight of Pharaoh, and it shall become small dust in all the land of Egypt, and shall be a boil breaking forth with blains upon man and upon beast throughout all the land of Egypt. And they took ashes of the furnace and stood before Pharaoh, and Moses sprinkled it up toward heaven, and it became a boil breaking forth with blains upon man and upon beast. And the magicians could not stand before Moses because of the boils, for the boil was upon the magicians and upon all of the Egyptians. And the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, and he hearkened not unto them, as the Lord had spoken unto Moses. And the Lord said unto Moses, Rise up early in the morning, and stand before Pharaoh, and say unto him, Thus saith the Lord, God of the Hebrews, Let my people go, that they may serve me. For I will at this time send all of my plagues upon thine heart, and upon thy servants, and upon thy people, that thou may knowest that there is none like me in all of the earth. Like I've mentioned before, there are more than likely many, many more gods that are tied. Egyptians had multiple gods, but sometimes these gods weren't just a god of one thing. They were gods of numerous things. Like we've seen Kunum a couple of times, and Ra. So these gods had different roles that they played. They weren't just god of one thing. They were sometimes the god of fertility, but they were also the god of love, or the god of harvest. They all had different roles that they supposedly played. But some believe that the ash that was actually used was from one of the furnaces that the Israelites had to use to bake the bricks. And I found that was very interesting, and how, again, that would be such poetic justice that God would use the ash from the furnaces where they had to make and bake these bricks at, to use it to bring harm to the Egyptians. Now, I don't know if you've ever had a boil, but I have. And it hurt really, really bad. And I just had one. And it was from an allergic reaction to some fabric softener my mom had used. And this is back when I was a teenager, so it's been a while. But I had this painful, throbbing blister. And I actually have a scar from it. And it was very, very tender. It was hot to the touch. If you touched it, it was like you couldn't help but just yelp out because there was so much pain. Now imagine, for a moment, being covered in these boils from head to toe. There's no way you can relax. There's no way you can sleep. There's no way you can work. You are covered in these boils everywhere. So every nerve in your body is firing off because it is in pain. And as you can see, the plagues are starting to escalate by this point. And they were escalating because Pharaoh simply would not listen. So far, the plagues had had little effect upon Pharaoh. He could care less. He's lied to Moses a couple times. Go and let your people, don't go out of the land, but you can go and you can sacrifice to your God and remember me. But then Moses said, I can't do that. We cannot do that because we're sacrificing the animals that you all hold revere. And if we do this, if we sacrifice these animals that they revere in the sight of the Egyptians, surely they will stone us. So the plagues were intensifying, and we start to also see a different change. Before, Pharaoh's heart, he had hardened his heart on its own. He refused to budge. He refused to back down from his stance. He refused to have compassion upon these people that had been enslaved for 400 years. He refused to let these people go. He had grown accustomed to them being in the land, and they were a commodity just as the animals, the livestock that they had just lost due to this plague that God had sent of the death of the livestock due to some disease in some shape or form. The Israelites were a commodity for him. They made his economy better. They made it boom. They worked, and he didn't have to work his people so much. They were a free source of labor. But we have a few gods here, one of them being Sekhmet, the lion-headed goddess, and she was believed to have the power to not only start epidemics, but end them as well. And there were special priests called Sinu, who were dedicated to her. And then we have Sepphoris, god of healing, Imhotep, god of medicine and guardian of the healing sciences. And yet again, this plague would also affect the purity of the priests yet again. So not only is God mocking these gods and goddesses that were supposed to be the gods of healing and epidemics and the ending of epidemics, but he was mocking the priest and saying, where's your gods? Why aren't you whole? Why aren't you healed? You're in pain just as much as everyone else is. You serve these gods. You serve them night and day, and you're dedicated to their worship. But yet here you are in pain. Where is your gods? And the magicians were so crippled with pain that they could not even appear at the palace, and they were in such agony they couldn't even try to come up with a cure. Nothing that they did would work because this was a supernatural phenomenon from God. And there was no trying to replicate it or come up with a remedy for it. God put it on them, and only God could remove it. Exodus 9:15 through 26. For now I will stretch up my hand that I may smite thee and thy people with pestilence, and thou shalt be cut off from the earth. And in every deed for this cause have I raised thee up, for to show in thee my power, that my name may be declared throughout all the earth. As ye exaltedst thou thyself against my people, that thou wilt not let them go. Behold, tomorrow, about this time, I will cause it to rain a very grievous hail, such as hath not been in Egypt since the foundation thereof, even until now. Send therefore now, and gather thy cattle, and all thou hast in the field. For upon every man and beast which shall be found in the field shall not be brought home, the hell shall come down upon them, and they shall die. He that feared the word of the Lord among the servants of Pharaoh made his servants and his cattle flee into the houses. And he that regarded not the word of the Lord left his servants and his cattle out in the field. And the Lord said unto Moses, Stretch out thine hand toward heaven, that there may be hell in all the land of Egypt, upon man and upon beast, and upon every herb in the field, throughout all the land of Egypt. And Moses stretched forth his rod toward heaven, and the Lord sent thunder and hail, and the fire ran along upon the ground, and the Lord rained hail upon the land of Egypt. So there was hail and fire mingled with the hail, very grievous, such as there was none like it in all the land of Egypt, since it became a nation. And the hail smelt throughout all the land of Egypt, all that was in the field, both man and beast, and hail smelt every herb of the field, and brake every tree of the field. Only in the land of Goshen, where the children of Israel were, was there no hail. So first off, the weather that was about to be unleashed on Egypt was incomparable to anything that Egypt had ever seen before. Many parts of Egypt had never even went a year without rain. Some, they had rainy seasons, but they were nothing like they were about to see. They had a long and proud history and haughtily thought that they could handle anything that God dished out. But the problem was that they had grossly underestimated the severity of the plagues God would pour out on them. I don't think that they realized how severe, but the amazing thing is, God warned them about this one in advance to get their cattle inside. And those few Egyptians that had a God-fearing nature about them, they had seen that the Israelites' God, that Yahweh was the one true God, and that their gods weren't able to do anything. They weren't able to stop these plagues from coming upon the land. They weren't able to stop the pain they were feeling in their bodies and the livestock dying and their crops failing. They were not there because they were just idols. They had no power. So a few of the gods that are tied to weather, one is Nut, goddess of the sky, and considered to be the mother of 5 gods: Osiris, Hathor, Set, Isis, and Nephthys. Shu was the wind god. Horus was the hawk-headed god who was the king, god of kingship, protection, healing, and the sky and the sun. This plague would have not only mocked the gods themselves, but would have more than likely damaged or destroyed their monuments that they had made in their honor. And it said that God said that the hell would kill both man and beast that were left in the field. So this was a severe plague. It's still not as bad as some of the ones that are still coming. But so far up to date, this is the worst plague. They are intensifying. Just like during the tribulation, the Great Tribulation, each event, each trumpet, each bowl judgment, everything is going to intensify. The first 4 seals are going to unleash the Antichrist, the red horse, which symbolizes war, the gray horse, which symbolizes famine, and then the black horse, which symbolizes death. And then there's the other seals that are coming up along with the 4 horsemen, and as they go along, they intensify. Just as we see the plagues intensifying God's trying to wake Pharaoh up. He's trying to wake the Egyptians up. And Pharaoh just keeps hardening his heart. And it's during this time also that we begin to see another change. Not only does Pharaoh's heart harden, but the hearts of his servants are hardened as well. And they refuse to budge. Exodus 10:12-15. And the Lord said unto Moses, Stretch out thine hand over the land of Egypt for the locusts, that they may come upon the land of Egypt, and eat every herb of the land, even all the hail that have left. And Moses stretched forth his rod over the land of Egypt, and the Lord brought an east wind upon all the land that day, and all that night. And when it was morning, the east wind brought the locusts. And the locusts went up all over the land of Egypt, and rested in all the coast of Egypt. Very grievous were they. Before them there were no such locusts as they, neither after them shall such be. For they covered the face of the whole earth, so that the land was darkened, and they did eat every herb of the land, and all the fruit of the trees which the hail had left, and there remained not anything green in the trees or in the herbs of the field through all the land of Egypt. In ancient times, locusts could destroy an entire village's food supply in the matter of minutes. 1 square mile normally contains 100 million to 200 million of these creatures. There were many gods that were associated with the crops of Egypt, for the crops and the Nile were the source of life in this country. There was Napri, who was the god of grain, Emeret, the goddess of childbirth and crops, and Theramuthis, the goddess of fertility and the harvest. There have been discoveries of amulets in the shape of a locust that were probably worn by the Egyptians to ward off the swarms that would ravage their crops. In Exodus 10:15, it says that the locusts were so numerous that the land was darkened. The locusts would have not just destroyed the crops, but also the trees and the fruit of the land. And it was so bad that Pharaoh sent for Moses and Aaron in haste, and he actually confessed his sins against Yahweh and Moses and Aaron and pleaded for forgiveness for the plague to cease. However, Yahweh hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he did not let Israel go. And there was a reason why God allowed this to happen this way, because Pharaoh, he had not changed his stance. He was still a god. In his own eyes, he was still a god. He was Pharaoh of Egypt, and there was no god, no matter how mighty he was, that was going to tell Pharaoh what he had to do. And he was not going to let the Israelites go. And so God hardened his heart to show him that he was indeed God, and that he was going to bow, and that he would relent, and he would let the Israelites go. But sadly, he still has to go through more. His people still have to go through more because of his bullheaded heartedness. Exodus 10:21-23. And the Lord said unto Moses, Stretch out thine hand toward heaven, that there may be darkness over the land of Egypt, even darkness which may be felt. And Moses stretched forth his hand toward heaven, and there was a thick darkness in all the land of Egypt 3 days. They saw not one another, neither rose any from his place for 3 days. But all the children of Israel had light in their dwellings. Amun-Ra was the chief deity of Egypt and the sun god who was part of a very important triad of deities, including his wife Mut, the divine mother, queen of all gods, and their son Krons, the god of the moon. The sun god Ra was considered to be of great blessing to the land for his faithfulness in the providing the warmth and light of the sun with each day without fail. In Egyptian mythology, Horus was the god of light who personified the life-giving power of the sun. He was usually represented as a falcon-headed man wearing a sun disk as a crown. There was also the god Ptah, the one who created the moon, the sun, and the earth, Atum, the god of the sunset, and Shu, the god of sunlight and air. Khepri, who often appeared in the shape of a scarab, was a form of Ra. This plague would have also been a direct attack against Pharaoh, for he was the divine representation of the sun god Ra. Darkness covered the land for 3 days, and no one could see anything or leave their homes because the darkness was so vast. Yet there, where Israel was, they had light. I can't even imagine it being so dark that you can't see in front of you to even be able to light some form of light source to be able to see. But the darkness was so dark that more than likely didn't even help. Even if they could find it in the dark, they couldn't even see their hands in front of them, for the darkness was so vast. The sun was blotted out. The moon was blotted out. The stars were blotted out. There was no light in any shape or form in the land of Egypt. But in Goshen, they had light. That is so amazing to me. Exodus 12:29 through 30. And it came to pass that at midnight the Lord smote all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh that was set on his throne unto the firstborn of the captive that was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of cattle. And Pharaoh rose up in the night, he and all his servants, and all the Egyptians, and there was a great cry in Egypt, for there was not a house where there was not one dead. So this plague was more devastating than all of the plagues combined. And this plague would have also been directed at all the gods of Egypt, including Pharaoh. You know, a son was the firstborn, and he carried on for the father after he passed. He became the patriarch, and he also inherited a double portion of the father's inheritance, but he also represented special qualities of life. We see that in Genesis 49:3, when Jacob is talking to Reuben, as he's in his last days, and he's talking with his sons, and he says, Reuben, thou art my firstborn, my might, and the beginning of my strength, the excellency of dignity, and the excellency of power. So these qualities of life that he is telling Reuben is that he's his firstborn, his firstborn, his might, the beginning of his strength, the excellency of dignity, and the excellency of power. And even in modern times, you know, having a firstborn son, it's important because a son carries on the father's name. In this law, which you can see on the slide, I'm not even going to try to pronounce that because I will butcher it. It's decreed that the firstborn son would inherit the major portion of the family estate when the father died. The death of the firstborn son would cripple a family legally and emotionally. Some of these gods and goddesses that were tied to life and death, and all of these gods and goddesses are supposed to be protectors of life, protectors. They're supposed to be there when children are born. And so we have Isis, who is the goddess of fertility; Meshchenet, goddess that presided over the birth of children; Men, who is the god of procreation; Selket, guardian of life; Renuit, cobra goddess and guardian over Pharaoh. And Pharaoh, through this, it undermined his immortality through the inability to protect his son and his ability to provide for Egypt as well. Because Pharaoh's, the more prestige you had in life, the more wealth you had in life, the more things you had, the better life you would have in the afterlife. And so this right here in Egypt culture was undermining his status with immortality in the afterlife. And so that was a double blow for Pharaoh, not only because he has lost his firstborn son, but it's undermined his immortality, and it's also undermined his ability to provide for Egypt as well. And we see through this, though, that Pharaoh's heart is finally broken. The hardening of his heart has shattered. He is shattered. He is broken. All of Egypt is wailing because not one household has not been affected by this. Everyone in Egypt has lost someone. Not even the animals escaped this. All the firstborn animals died too. And that's including all of these animals that they held sacred. They lost these animals. And so this was a blow for all of Egypt. And the cry was so loud that Pharaoh had no choice but to let the Israelites go. And as they were leaving, the Egyptians were handing them stuff, handing them jewelry and clothing and shoes. And it was all fine and rich. They wanted them gone because they had brought so much disaster upon Egypt. They wanted them gone, and they were willing to give them anything to have them gone. Hi everyone. I hope you enjoyed this. This is completely different than what I'm used to doing. But it was kind of fun to try out something different than what I'm used to doing. But it was definitely out of my comfort zone. But it seems like, God likes to get us out of our comfort zone. But I pray that you did enjoy this presentation. It took a while to get it done. But I am pleased for the first video like this that it went so well. And all glory goes to God. It took a lot of research and a lot of time to find information on these gods and how each of them were tied to different things. And I was able to find some really good articles online that helped me out with finding out the information that I needed. So that was definitely a blessing. But I love you all. I am praying for you all. And just because I didn't talk about the rapture today doesn't mean that you're still not looking up, because we're going home. And we all know that the Red Sea, the parting of the Red Sea, is another type and shadow of the rapture. We're going home. We are. And it could just be just around the corner. And it's looking more and more like it very well could be. But remember, we have to keep our eyes on God. Even if this time passes, we're still going home. But we have to keep on going. We have to keep believing. And the most important thing is knowing where you stand. If you do not know Jesus as your Lord and Savior, you have nothing. Being a good person is not going to get you raptured. It's not going to get you to heaven. It's definitely not going to get you saved. You have to believe and trust in what Jesus did on the cross, that he completed the work on the cross. And I always put in my description box some salvation scriptures, and one of the most important ones is 1 Corinthians 15, 1 through 4. Let's turn there real quick. You know, it's so important that you know you're ready. And if you have Jesus, if you have placed your faith and your trust in him, you're ready. None of us are perfect. We all fall short of the glory of God. Moreover, brethren, I declare unto you the gospel which I preached unto you, which ye have also received, and wherein ye stand, by which ye also are saved, if ye keep in memory what I preached unto you, unless ye have believed in vain. For I delivered unto you first of all which I also received, how Christ died for our sins, according to the Scriptures, that he was buried, and that he rose again the third day, according to the Scriptures. So if you believe, just as according to the Scriptures, it says that Jesus hung on the cross, that he died, and he rose again. We're going home. We have a lot to look forward to. If this life was the only thing that we had to look forward to, we would all be miserable. This world is so vile and so evil. I want nothing to do with it. And I know many of you feel that way too. I want nothing to do with this world. This world holds no lure for me. And I am 100% completely sold out to God. I told God, I said, God, if I don't get another house, it's okay. If I don't buy a house here on earth, I have a home more beautiful than anything I could ever comprehend or even think about here on earth, waiting for me in heaven. Either way, I am blessed. You know, I'm blessed. I have a roof over my head. Yes, it's not mine, it's my parents'. But I have a roof over my head. My cats have a roof over their head. I have food to eat. I have a place to lay my head. I am blessed. Not everyone has that. And we have to learn to be content in all situations. And it's been hard. It's been very hard. This has been the hardest, almost 10 months. September 8th, it will be 10 months since my husband passed. And it's been hard. It's been really hard. But God. And I have learned to be content. I'm not saying I don't cry and I don't have my moments where I just miss my husband unbearably, but I have that blessed hope of Titus 2:13. We all have that blessed hope of Titus 2:13. And in 1 Thessalonians 13 through 18, it tells us not to grieve like the world grieves, who has no hope. If you believe that Jesus died on the cross, that he was buried and he rose again, and your loved ones, if they were found in Christ, you're going to see them at the resurrection and the rapture, and we're going to meet them in the clouds. That's exciting. We are going to see our loved ones again. I'm going to see my husband again. I'm going to see my best friend, my grandparents, and my aunts and my uncles that were found in Christ. You're going to see those that you love dearly again. And we're going to get to see Jesus face to face. I can't even imagine that. Every time I think of looking upon Jesus' face and seeing the nail scars in his hands and in his feet, I tear up and I get emotional because I can't even begin to imagine how beautiful he is, how magnificent, how mighty and powerful and awe-inspiring he must be to look upon. And I'm kind of jealous of my husband that he got to meet him first. You know, things happen in our lives that we get blindsided by. And it doesn't have to be the death of a loved one. It can be an unexpected illness. It can be losing your job. There's so many things that side blind us in this life. We're not always treated right. And the closer you get to God, the smaller your circle gets. And I have found that out. I have one person that I know truly cares about me as far as friends go. And I know I could pick up that phone and say, I need you. And if she's in the area, she's coming. I've got a couple of people like that. But one that I know I can definitely depend on. And I used to be able to say I had a lot of people in my ballpark. Not anymore. The closer you get, the smaller your circle gets. But that's okay. We're a family. You know, I was worried about the name change, but God had laid it on my heart to change the name from my name to something else. And I wanted to involve you all to help me pick out the name. And when Rapture Ready for Jesus was the one that was voted for, I was kind of concerned, I'm not going to lie. And the thought that came to my mind is, oh boy, here we go. Mockers and scoffers. They're gonna come out of the woodwork. It's not been so bad so far though. But that can change in a heartbeat. I don't wanna brag. Bragging's not good anyways. But you know, it's gonna be what it's gonna be. But it was definitely not the one that I had hoped for. Not that this is not a good name. But I guess I had my mind set on something else. But I was like, no, I told them that I'm going to let them pick the name. And that's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to be that kind of a person. That's just not even right. So, Rapture Ready for Jesus is what it is. But keep looking up, guys. And I've got something else I want to talk to you about that just happened here recently, and it was a good thing. It was humbling, but it was good. It needed to happen because I had no clue about something that I had done unintentionally and that I was actually messing around with numerology. I had no clue. And so I don't have to work Monday, so I'll probably do the video Monday. So I'm going to be praying and asking God and making sure that's exactly what He wants me to do because, like I said, this is His channel. This is not my channel. This is His. And that's why I don't do a lot of videos like this because I just like the Lord to take control. And sometimes I feel like I ramble, but I don't like going by scripts. I want it to be heartfelt and I want it to be sincere. And I feel like when you're reading off a script, it's not sincere. And I'm not saying that people who do are not sincere. It's just not me, if that makes sense. It's just not me. But all right, guys, I'm going to get off here, and I am praying that you have a blessed night and you have a wonderful day tomorrow. And I will see you on Monday, which is Labor Day. So, God bless you all. I love you all. And most importantly, Jesus loves you all. Keep looking up because we are going to go home. Don't forget that this is not our home. We have that blessed Titus 2:13 waiting on us. God bless you all, and I love you all. Bye.